President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, put Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in his place and refused to make an exception for Hungary from the American sanctions against Russian oil. Trump publicly stated this in a comment to journalists. Earlier, the Trump administration had openly said that Viktor Orban had plenty of time to find alternative sources of oil supply. But Orban thought he was the smartest. And throughout all the years of Russia's war against Ukraine, he did absolutely nothing to avoid being 100% dependent on Russian oil. Now, Hungary's Prime Minister plans to ask Donald Trump for a November meeting to again request a delay on buying Russian oil. He's trying to be sneaky and find a loophole again. Budapest is doing everything it can to resist switching to other sources of raw materials, even though they do exist. But Hungary's position looks increasingly weak, and Hungary has started preparing for fuel supply disruptions, with gas stations already bracing for a huge shortage. But Orbán stubbornly keeps saying no, I want to buy only Russian oil. And in this episode, we'll figure out why he's clinging so tightly to this Russian oil. Spoiler alert, it's because he's making money from it. I'm Alexei Peachy. It's November 2nd. Let's discuss this topic in detail. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment under this episode, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. It says there, support the Alexei Peachy channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. I appreciate any support you provide. So, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, refused to make an exception for Hungary from the American sanctions against Russian oil. He stated this in a comment to journalists. Moreover, Trump confirmed that the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orbán, personally approached him with the corresponding request but received a blunt refusal. Quote, Viktor Orbán asked for an exemption from the sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft. We didn't grant it, but he asked. It's funny that at the same time Trump called Viktor Orbán his friend. To be fair, he calls Putin, Xi Jinping and others his friends too. And Viktor Orbán, let me remind you, was really hoping during the election period at the end of 2024 that he would become Donald Trump's right-hand man in Europe. But it just didn't work out. And countries that continue to buy goods or cooperate with companies that have come under American sanctions risk facing secondary restrictions for their violations. And here, let me remind you that a little earlier, Viktor Orbán publicly stated that a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump would still take place in Budapest. And all these stories, as he said, from journalists and so on, people like me, for example, that there would be no meeting. Trump later confirmed there wouldn't be a meeting, calling it all fake. Orbán at that point already thought that he, had pulled a golden ticket. Orbán stated that his country would look for ways to bypass the new restrictions against Russian oil giants. This was already after the meeting had been cancelled. And with this statement, Orbán only angered the Americans and Trump personally. The United States Permanent Representative to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, stated that he expects Hungary, Turkey and Slovakia, which continue to receive energy resources from Russia, to develop plans to stop these supplies and to implement them. Here's an important quote. Hungary has not made any plans or taken active steps to reduce its dependence on Russia. This is a quote from Matthew Whitaker. And by the way, Turkey is already actively rejecting Russian oil. This was covered last episode. Check the channel and watch it. But Viktor Orbán still wants to persuade Donald Trump. Orbán is used to blackmailing Brussels and constantly getting some concessions for himself. Because unfortunately, his vote in the European Council's voting is important, unfortunately, and it is taken into account. And Orbán constantly abused his veto power in Brussels and in this way really managed to get a lot of concessions for himself. A lot. But he forgot that Donald Trump and in general the United States of America are a completely different story. There, he doesn't have a single ace up his sleeve, no veto power at all. Overall, Viktor Orbán shouldn't show off around Americans. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán of Hungary reportedly plans to meet Donald Trump on November 7 to request a delay in purchasing Russian oil. He was very successful at this in Europe, and the delay remains. Budapest is doing everything possible to avoid switching to other raw material sources. And analysts explain that this is not a threat to the country's energy security, as the authorities claim, but rather financial losses for the budget and Hungary's largest energy company called MOL. But Hungary's position is looking increasingly weak, and it has started preparing for fuel supply disruptions. And instead of finally looking for alternatives, the Hungarian government has prepared amendments to the law on storing imported oil and petroleum products, so that, in case of such disruptions due to United States sanctions, the SPADBEC, Special Reserve Gas Stations, can be used to supply critically important consumers and services. And the amendments, which will not affect retail customers, are supposed to come into force on January 1, 2026. In an emergency, the Hungarian government will be able to determine the procedure for using certain gas stations and the priority for receiving fuel. This indicates that the Hungarian government is preparing for a huge gasoline shortage in the country. You can't blame Ukraine or Brussels for this anymore. At the same time, Budapest is working on ways to bypass the United States sanctions against LUKOIL and Rosneft that come into effect on November 21. Viktor Orban publicly stated this last week. However, Orban has really been backed into a corner here. Because in September, the European Commission announced plans to develop a tariff for the remaining supplies of Russian oil in order to completely phase it out by 2027. In short, if European tariffs are introduced, they will make Russian hydrocarbons uncompetitive compared to other sources. Even if Viktor Orban somehow manages to persuade Donald Trump and delay the sanctions for Hungary. And here comes the Hungarian foreign minister, Petros Szijjártó, who says, quote, "The European Commission's efforts to abandon Russian energy resources will destroy the security of our energy supply." And this is not the first time I am bringing you this crucial information. Hungary can easily give up Russian oil, and all of Viktor Orban's statements to the contrary are complete nonsense. The fact is that the Adria pipeline runs through neighboring Croatia, and Hungary could receive oil delivered by tankers to the Adriatic Sea coast through this pipeline. There's nothing that even needs to be built, and Croatia has long said that it is open to such cooperation. In Croatia, they say they can launch the system in minutes to let Hungary receive the oil. But today, Petros Szijjártó said that in this way, Croatia is, quote, "trying to profit from the war in Ukraine." The Hungarian authorities constantly accuse Croatia of allegedly raising the oil transit fee in 2022 when Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine began, which supposedly makes its purchases extremely unprofitable for Budapest. And here's an interesting point. The thing is, this information is considered a trade secret, so it cannot be verified. Croatia denies raising prices for Hungary, while Hungary insists they did. No one can verify either claim. Nevertheless, the Croatian Minister of Economy, Ante Šušnjar, states that the transit fee has remained the same. It is only 2% of the final oil price and is applied equally to all partners. So, is Hungary just making excuses? According to Šušnjar, the accusation that is constantly repeated by Hungary about overcharging for transit and the pipeline not operating at 100% capacity does not correspond to reality. Quote, "This is just an excuse to keep buying Russian oil. We have no problems with ensuring supplies. We can be ready in a matter of minutes." In addition, Hungary's statement is complete nonsense. Also because the final fuel price in Hungary is determined not by the price of crude oil, but by benchmark fuel prices. For example, diesel. In the Mediterranean region, there is a benchmark price, and it doesn't matter how much oil costs, this benchmark price is set for the entire region. In Hungary, it's linked to this benchmark price. And if the price of oil rises, it has no effect on the prices of the final products. For ordinary Hungarians, this shouldn't impact gas station prices at all. But this means a decrease in profits for the company MOL, which is presumably where Viktor Orban gets his income from. That's the whole reason for the protest. And finally, I'll add just 3 facts. Draw your own conclusions. First, Hungary will end this year with a budget deficit of 4.6% of gross domestic product. Second, in April 2026. Hungarian elections show Viktor Orban's party trailing opposition candidate Peter Magyar's party in the polls. That's why Orban would like to increase spending from the budget, but unfortunately it's empty. And thirdly, in the total imports of the European Union, the share of Russian oil dropped from 26% in 2021 to 3% in 2024, while Hungary, by contrast, raised its share of Russian oil from 61% to 86%. So I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.